first Wednesday of the new year with Webster Tarpley on tap for you this first hour tonight. Webster, hi, how are you?
Hello, Happy New Year.
Same to you. You sound muffled and far away.
Here I am.
Oh, he's here. I thought you were on another dimension there for a moment. We've got him, and there is a lot going on. I think this is going to be a definite fasten your seatbelts kind of year, and what better man to go to for an overview and a distillation of some of the chaos out there. Another big news day, as they say, a slaughter, a massacre in Paris. One suspect purportedly has surrendered to police, and there is a massive manhunt on for the other two. They all three have Muslim names. It would appear to be some sort of a Muslim act. We don't know the details, of course, yet.
I would hold off on that one. Actually.
That's why I say it appears. It appears to be. Remember, I said appears to be. We will not rule anything in or out at this point. However, with the false flag atmosphere on this planet, anything's possible. I don't know who did it. I do know who they have identified. It could be another Lee Harvey Oswald kind of a thing. You never know. Anyway, your views on it.
Let me go back to the 1970s, right, when I began to find my way in analyzing these intelligence agencies and terrorism and so forth. And the one that I started with was the Aldo Moro case in Italy in 1978. And what you could see there was something that I later decided to call geopolitical terrorism. In other words, quite a lot of the terrorism that has occurred in Europe since World War II has been a matter of maintaining the blocs, or in this case, after the collapse of the Soviets and the Warsaw Pact, simply maintaining this U.S. hegemony for the past 20 or 25 years, when the supposed need for that had disappeared. And you could see this, for example, with Aldo Moro. He said, "I'm going to bring the Italian Communist Party into a coalition government with the Christian Democrats, and with that we will be fully sovereign, and we can then proceed to make deals with the Arab countries and other places in the third world." And that would have been a great thing for Italy. It would actually have been a great thing for the world. But no, powerful forces said no, and these have been brought back to NATO networks, right? There are books by perfectly respectable scholars, right? Daniele Ganzer writes about Gladio, right? So Gladio was then admitted by former Prime Minister Andreotti in the early 1990s.
All listeners should look up Operation Gladio. That's Gladio.
And the P2 Lodge, right? The P2 Lodge.
That's right, that too.
The political part of it, that became obvious in the early 90s. And then the Gladio was the armed branch, and that's a kind of a division of labor you see in some other countries. So I think that's important, right? That the terrorism can be geopolitical, and you don't have to go back that far. I would suggest that in the middle of 2011, you had a kind of a rickety coalition that was bombing Libya, right? France was doing some of the work; they had taken the lead under Sarkozy. But there was a significant amount of aircraft coming from small countries like the Netherlands or Norway.
It was an odd soup.
Norway was the one that said, "Well, we're quitting," and then you have this Breivik start shooting at the members of the ruling party, which I thought was
very
rather heavy-handed. Let's also remember some other context. In France, back in, this must have been in 2012, as Sarkozy was preparing for the elections, we had the case of this guy, Mohamed Merah, M-E-R-A-H. And this got some attention, right? He attacked a Jewish school and began killing people there. And he was riding around on a motor scooter, and he just kept doing that. He actually carried out 3 attacks. There was material about him which the police suppressed, and then when they finally cornered him, they had to make sure they killed him. And it'll be interesting to see with these 2 accused people today, the Kouachi brothers whether they get killed, because the idea is that the testimony of such people could be very embarrassing. But
Webster, little conflict in the so-called news world today. It was reported that one suspect was dead and the other two were on the lam.
Yeah, let me get to that. We'll get to all that. But context first, right?
Yeah.
And the context would be, I think, with Marat, right, that he was an agent of the French intelligence services. And he was not just of anybody. He was an agent of Claude Guéant, G-U-E accent aigu A-N-T, who was the Minister of the Interior, and of another guy called Squarcini, Bernard Squarcini, who had been the head of the DST, that's like the FBI, and the DST morphed into the DCRI. I won't inflict this in French.
We won't be tested on this, I hope.
No. But you get the idea. And this became very obvious that this poor Marat was somebody who quite possibly had nothing to do with any of these attacks.
That's what I said earlier, Lee Harvey Marat.
Something like that. That he had, but again, Lee Harvey is not maybe clear enough. But the idea is that this was a classic patsy. He was an informer. He had been sent around the Middle East, and then it turned out that Guéant and Squarcini were his handlers, right? And these were high level. So we have all that. Then there's also this other angle, the free speech. Let's just talk a little bit about free speech. It's amazing. We have one free speech case per week or every other week or whatever it is. We had the famous movie, The Interview, with the famous Sony Studios having a movie about the assassination of Mr. Kim,
greatest
the ruler of North Korea.
In film history. Greatest publicity
the DPRK,
coup I've seen.
Right? So, but look, so Kim gets killed in this film. Now, who put this out? Well, Sony. Now, I have already written in early 2012 an essay which was published in the Middle East, I think, where I point out that Sony is closely linked to the Rand Corporation and therefore to the U.S. intelligence community. Right? And this is the famous thing that the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica is so close to Sony and the other Hollywood studios, and that we have the case of this charming lady, Amy Pascal, who had been on the board of the Rand Corporation and is still the head, I believe, of Sony Pictures, not the whole Sony, but Sony Picture Department. And Amy Pascal had a father who worked all his life, or most of his life, as an economist for the Rand Corporation. So Sony, Rand Corporation, this is quite close. And specifically, we know that when they began producing this movie, they appealed to a guy called Bruce Bennett, somebody who worked for the Rand Corporation, whose specialty was the overthrow of the North Korean regime, and who had written scenarios about this. And one of the principal parts of his scenario is, if you want to overthrow the North Korean regime, you need to do this with the assassination of the supreme leader. So that is, I think that perhaps makes it clear why a government like North Korea would take that seriously. In other words, if the number one imperialist planner of the demise of you physically and your regime and your values or whatever else they have, if that's coming at you in the form of a movie, that's serious. That's not some kind of fraternity.
Did you see
prank,
the movie,
right?
by the way?
No, not yet. I'm waiting for it to come around in a cheaper format.
I'm waiting for it to go away.
Anyway, look, this thing with Sony, I think it also shows the gullibility of the left liberal mushheads, in the sense that they take to the streets and they say, truth has prevailed, freedom has prevailed, liberty and freedom of speech. And what they're really saying is they're celebrating the success of a covert operation by the intelligence agencies. And what it shows is among the left liberals and the mushheads, a positive hunger to be duped. They can't get enough of it. Now, the other one is Charlie. Let's look at Charlie-Hebdo, the satirical weekly. This is a tradition in France, right? You can say it goes back to Voltaire. It's these groups that pretend to be fearless advocates of some kind of truth, but then when you scratch a little bit, they are connected to very powerful people in high places. In this case, Charlie-Hebdo was it goes back under various forms to the late 60s, and it was part of a anti-de Gaulle apparatus that was created, and I'm sure whether New York and London had any hand in it, this is hard to say, but this was certainly it was anti-de Gaulle, which was one of the main concerns of New York and London at the time. So they were anti-de Gaulle at a time when it was cool to be anti-de Gaulle, and then we get these Mohammed cartoons, and we know that the Mohammed cartoons were also not spontaneous, but that they have something to do with the Bilderberger group meeting in Rotach-Egern near Munich in the summer of 2005, I guess it must have been. These Mohammed cartoons come out, and if you go back and you can look on Tarpley.net, what I wrote about that at the time was that this was an attempt to recruit Europe for the war that was obviously being planned by Cheney and others against Iran. That if you didn't have some further hysteria against Arabs and Muslims in Europe, then that wouldn't work. So they had to have it. So look at all this context we have, right? We have the history of Charlie-Hebdo. We have this question about the so-called fight for freedom and free speech from the Mohammed cartoons and the Bilderberger group down to the Charlie-Hebdo. And, of course, some of that is funny. And, of course, Voltaire could be funny, and it didn't change what Voltaire really was. And now that I mentioned Voltaire, the original historical one, but there's also a very important and interesting group that operates in the world, right? It's the Voltaire Network of Thierry Meyssan. And I would just point, without going into it too much more here, but since he knows the interior of France so well, one of the things that he puts forward is that when you do this, when you have a stunt like this in France, where the Muslim minority is large, and there are all those Algerians and Moroccans and Tunisians, but especially Algerians, right, who have come over and have whole neighborhoods to themselves. He regards this as an attempt to start a civil war in France. Now, I'm eagerly studying that thesis, right, to see if that's true. But here's what I found about it, and then we can maybe say a few more things. It is that, and I would go back to this Breivik once again, right? That when you get down to the disciplining of the NATO alliance and the geopolitics, and that would be when Norway said we're not going to bomb Libya anymore. Pow! Breivik goes on a shooting spree, killing the children, really, of the elite of the Social Democratic Party of the country.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but now we have this question with Charlie-Hebdo. Now, what has France done wrong? Right? What have they done? I think there's something fairly big and important that may have something to do with this. It is and let's see if we can find it, an interview. It's a radio interview by Hollande, the president of France. Right? He has been very unpopular. His popularity is down at Jimmy Carter, George Bush Jr. levels. It's about 10 or 15 or 20%, depending on who you ask.
Calling for the sanctions against Russia.
Yes, that's exactly it. That the NATO sanctions against.
Yeah.
This is. Let's consider how important this is, right? Essentially, this is again the disciplining of the alliance, right? If Norway drops out of the bombing of Libya, then Netherlands follow and others follow. If France drops out of the sanctions regime against Russia, not much left. And sitting right in the middle of that are these amphibious attack ships, right? These
Mistral.
These two vessels that have been sold by France to Russia.
Helicopter aircraft carrier type.
Yeah, they're a kind of aircraft carrier and assault ship. So what he says is that if this is a 2-hour interview, and I think it's actually the day before yesterday or yesterday. I think on Monday, actually. So he has a 2-hour interview on the radio, and talks about foreign policy. He says, Putin has assured me that he does not want to annex the eastern Ukraine. He told me that, and the implication is that Hollande believes it. And then he says, quote, I think the sanctions must stop now. They must be lifted if there is progress. If there is no progress, the sanctions will remain. This is all Hollande, president of France. And he can do these things, right? He doesn't have to ask. It's a powerful office. The French presidency, in some ways, more powerful than the U.S. one because of the things he can essentially neutralize his parliament. He can send them home and make them face re-election. Mm-hmm. And he repeats, Mr. Putin told me he does not want to annex eastern Ukraine. He has told me that. What he wants to do there is to remain influential. What he wants is for Ukraine not to fall into the NATO camp. And that, I think, makes it quite reasonable. There's even a paper. There's a paper from a guy at the Brookings Institution, this guy O'Hanlon, which essentially says you can get a deal with Russia on this. The principal thing you have to do is to recognize that there is a legitimate Russian sphere of influence around Russian borders where it is intolerable for Russia to have actively hostile states. And then with Nazi states like Poroshenko and his SS veterans from Lvov, right? That's intolerable for Russia.
And the Ratsenyuk right behind, always in the shadows, pulling strings.
Well, of course, Yatsenyuk is an IMF agent, right? That's his particular approach is the economic one.
Very quickly, interesting.
But wait, there's more. Concerning what Hollande said, because again, I'm arguing. You got to look at this. You can find a good version of this on France 24, right? The French cable news channel. So here's the other thing. On January 15th, there are going to be talks in Kazakhstan. And here, Poroshenko, the one I call Pornoshenko,
we call him Porky over here.
IMF puppet and NATO puppet, is going to meet President Putin of Russia. It's expected that Merkel of Germany and Hollande will go along. And Hollande says in this interview, I will go to Astana, capital of Kazakhstan, on January 15th on one condition, which is that there should be the possibility of making progress. All right, so in this Mistral class, the two warships, there's a very big issue because of the whole economy of certain French shipbuilding
are hanging on these
towns.
ships. I expect them to be released fairly soon if Hollande continues on the path he is currently trotting.
But now he's been given a warning. So look, here's the other thing.
There are fingerprints all over this thing that are not pretty. I got you.
Sure. Yeah. We have this question of Libya, right? People like Bernard-Henri Lévy and others are demanding that Hollande now unilaterally, if necessary, intervene in Libya, where chaos has now ensued.
Bernie's been a mouth that roared for several years now.
But you look at it from the point of view of Hollande. He says, I'm not going to do it. France will not intervene in Libya because it's up to the international community to take this responsibility. Now, the other side of the coin is France does intervene where they want to. They have intervened in Ivory Coast. They have intervened in Mali. They have military contingents in quite a few of these places, right? There's a French sphere. The general rule of thumb that I have is that Gaddafi and Libya provided a tremendous backstop of stability for that entire Sahara-Sahel belt. And now Gaddafi has been removed from the picture. I think the French are attempting to expand into that area, looking for God knows what strategic raw materials. They may have a better idea than we do, right? They may know better. With that, there may be a conflict with the British.
There's uranium there. They've got nuclear power plants.
The general idea is that, right? That there's something very valuable. So Chad, Mali, these places, they're all ex-French, right? So the French know them better than anybody. So Hollande says, I'm not going to go to Libya, but I do go to these other places. And then they ask him about Greece. And, of course, we all have to be aware this is the great positive development of early 2015 is that there will now be a Greek parliamentary election on January 25th, which is very likely to lead to the victory of the anti-austerity party, the Syriza, the left union, under Alexis Tsipras. And since I'm from the United Front Against Austerity and the Tax Wall Street Party, I'm welcoming the perspective that that Alexis Tsipras will become the prime minister of Greece, and when they have these European summits in Brussels and Strasbourg and all the rest, that Alexis Tsipras will be sitting across from Merkel and Cameron and these other austerity ghouls, and he'll be saying, no more cuts, no more sacrifices for the bankers. He's promised a very active anti-tax evasion policy, and he says he's going to get tough with the Greek oligarchs and no longer give them their things like their broadcast licenses for free, in addition to the principal demand, which is roll back austerity and cut the country's debt by half at least.
How do you say
haircut?
How do you say Tarpley tax in Greek? That'll be on.
Well, again, it's the Wall Street sales tax, or London sales tax, or maybe Frankfurt sales tax.
Well, he'll pick up
like
on a lot of things. It'll be interesting for the Greek people. They've suffered enough. Here's a little note as we slide into the break, Webster. Luhansk today. Chairman of the People's Council of the self-proclaimed Luhansk People's Republic, the LPR, Alexei Karyakin, said that Ukraine, Kiev, Porky, and Ratsenyuk is ready to give up territories which are currently under control of Luhansk. He said Ukraine, in his words, has said 2 checkpoints operate on the line of contact with the LPR and the border services. He said this proves that at the moment Ukraine, is ready to part from the territories controlled by us. So we'll see. Back with more expert and fascinating analysis, as always, with Webster in just a couple of minutes. Hang on. Okay, and we're back with Webster, talking about events in Europe today, which have tentacles that go all over the place.
Jeff, if I just get back to this interview with Hollande, I believe on Monday on the radio, because it shows what has the French government been cooking up, right, of the past couple of weeks. That it's probably better known behind the scenes, and it was better known sooner behind the scenes than just what we can see in public. But you can see a lot in public. So again, I'm tired of these sanctions against Russia. I wanted, in effect, I want to deliver these warships, and I want to get back to normal, right? Which this is, I can see Kerry, Samantha Power, the rest of these people are apoplectic. Cameron, remember, the real heart of the hostility to Russia is always among the British, and that's a tradition that has gone on since about the time of, or just after Napoleon. Then he says, I'm not going to invade Libya on my own and get bogged down. But on the other hand, he's kept a free hand to go where it might be advantageous for France. And then on this Greek question, we had Merkel popping off a couple of days earlier. You have to bear in mind the entire reactionary campaign against Syriza is a scare campaign. It's based on hysteria. And it says, if you elect Syriza, then Greece will leave the euro. Well, that's not true. The Greek Syriza party has never said that. They've said the opposite. They say they want to stay in the euro and fight. And I welcome that, because that's my position too. Generally in Europe, the people that want to leave the euro are right-wing reactionaries, right? The Alternatives for Germany. Marine Le Pen, the great demagogic beneficiary of the events of today. This guy Farage of the UK Independence Party, a true scoundrel. Farage rhymes with garbage.
I didn't want to say it.
This guy's bad. And Grillo, Beppe Grillo, is now unmasking in Italy more and more as a racist, xenophobic...
Well, don't forget my relative in Italy, Renzi. That's true. That's our family name.
Right,
we come from Italy.
He's propped up. He and Berlusconi prop each other up. But
say something nice. Come on, be nice.
Well, the one thing you can say is that there's an alliance between Italy and Russia, which has stood the test of time.
They're ready to bail out on these sanctions yesterday. They're getting hurt.
Yes, of course. So that's the whole point, is that if France says we're sick of the sanctions, then the entire position collapses on the U.S. side,
right.
And you get this division in Europe where now it's Italy, France, and quite a few others saying we're sick of austerity and we're sick of sanctions and we're sick of Merkel. And that, I think, is a good thing. But now, Merkel had said, if Syriza wins, Greece will have to leave the euro. And she's been widely denounced by that. And that's irresponsible, crazy, not what Syriza proposes. What she's doing is repeating the election propaganda of Samaras, the right-wing austerity ghoul of the New Democracy Party, who's been acting as the IMF enforcer, right, the austerity enforcer on the scene. But Hollande in this interview says, well, the Greeks have to decide for themselves. They have commitments they should respect, but they can decide for themselves. And there's no idea that Greece is going to be expelled or anything like that. And we'll have to see whether this happens or not. But as of now, there's supposed to be a Franco-German summit, Merkel and Hollande, in a couple of days, precisely to talk about what to do about Greece and above all, what to say about it. So it seems to me that we have the following, that Hollande had gotten into a desperate condition, right, where he was considered politically moribund and decrepit and so forth. And I think he has finally decided that he's going to try something new, a rapprochement with Russia. In other words, what the French institutions are telling him to do. The French exception, right, as they used to say. L'exception française is that France represents, because of its independence and its insistence on being independent, an exception in the context of Western Europe. In other words, it's the most independent-minded country on the NATO side all during the Cold War, and it still is today. So you've got all these French institutions who are saying, we don't like these sanctions, we don't like that fascist government there in Kiev. We don't want to wreck the euro spitefully because the Greeks want to get a debt reduction. They're probably right. So there's a whole history of the France that can say no to London and no to Washington, and that, of course, has been in eclipse. But that it looks to me like the institutions may have recaptured Sarkozy, so that now we have the stuff today. Now,
so Sarkozy
the whole thing
is, of course, now back in the political light, leading the opposition. That's interesting. Didn't think he'd come back. Sarko.
Oh, yeah, Sarkozy. Now, remember, when we say Sarkozy, we should say his real name, Sarkozy Wisner, or Wisner Sarkozy. In other words, he is the son of the CIA.
That's
right. He is the stepson of one of the of a member, this guy Wisner, who was a member of one of the key CIA.
That leads me
family.
to my next question for you. Does the little Sarkozy, does he benefit from this event in the long term? Hollande seems to be stepping off the reservation. This may have fingerprints of international intel on it. We don't know. That's why I used the word appears in the beginning of the program. We don't know.
Well, we can certainly say that the likely beneficiaries of this tragic event, which I condemn, which I denounce absolutely, Sarkozy could benefit. And Sarkozy is obviously, the CIA has a soft spot in its heart for Sarkozy Wisner. You may remember then back in 2012 when we had the Mohammed Merah case, one of the reasons for that timing was that the Merah case was supposed to be an opportunity for Sarkozy to look really good and to refurbish and burnish his credentials as the interior minister he once was. You remember that Sarkozy had distinguished himself as Islamophobic, right, anti-Arab. He had this thing where he said, the Arabs in the Paris suburbs, c'est de la racaille, like rascal, right? They're, bad people, right? I don't like them. So the 2012 event with Merah was supposed to help Sarkozy win the election, but he was so hated that he couldn't do it.
Well, he's back leading the opposition. That's a surprise.
But the opposition now includes this Madame Le Pen. And she, of course, her lineage is Vichy-Soir fascist. Her father, the elder Le Pen, right, the guy who brought this National Front to where it is
Nothing
now,
to do with potato soup, folks.
was an official of the Vichy government, right? In as Mitterrand, as was Mitterrand, the French
This
socialist
is World War
president.
II we're talking about now. Yeah.
Right, and this Madame Le Pen, she pretends to be a friend of Putin. That's pure deception. I wouldn't believe that for a minute.
Interesting.
You'll see her falling into line. As Tsipras says, somebody like Le Pen is not an opponent of the system. She's the reserve army of the system.
All right. Hold on, Webster. We have to pause our last time here. We'll be back with the ever-remarkable Webster Griffin Tarpley, and what a knowledge of history. You have to have it, or you cannot make the kinds of statements pulling this together and pointing us in the right directions to look that Webster does. And we will continue in just a minute. Okay, and we're back. France has changed so much. Well, most of Europe has. France is now estimated to have between, no one knows for sure, 5 to 10% of its total population identifies itself as being Muslim. What is the most dangerous city in Europe, Webster, now? What is considered to be the most dangerous city in Europe?
I am not going to accept this question because I disagree. There's no authority that can tell you this stuff.
Well, it's
all propaganda.
It's the problem with the mainstream media. But anyway,
right.
It's they claim it is Marseille with a 40% Muslim population. Just FYI.
Well, Marseille has always been a tough town.
Well, it's a port town. Of course
it's a port, right? They have sailors and everything like this, right? The Apache dance comes, I think, from there.
Okay, go ahead.
France, the French, I think, to a certain degree, there's been a justification for this, right? The French politique back in the 1500s, late 1500s and 1600s under Henry IV. To be a politique was to say there are Protestants, there are Calvinists, there are Catholics, there are all kinds of people, right? There are Huguenots. But the civil magistrate has to have the last word. So there's a tradition of French secularism that goes back quite a ways. And the reason you don't know how many are Muslim is that it is illegal to do a census asking somebody, what's your religion? Because this is supposed to play no role. So the secularism that is the tradition of the country is, I think for them it's a valid tradition. And there's a certain echo that we see that here with the separation of church and state. But the question now is, what's with these intelligence agencies, right? And these people like Claude Guéant, the former interior minister, and Monsieur Squarcini of the DST and the DCRA. There's also that older generation, Demagogy. Boy, was he dirty. So they have there's a Vichy faction in the intelligence services, and they're happy to serve the Anglo-Americans. But they're also then the Gaullists, the nationalists, and what I would think of as the real French, right? The ones who can say no, and who's, what can we say? The fact that they're there with a contrary point of view is an enrichment for world culture and for political debate. But let's look at what happened today. You were saying quite correctly, this whole story was completely chaotic, and I think that may have to do with the factions in the French services. There was this question all day long: how many? Was it 2 shooters? Was it one driver of a getaway car and 2 shooters, or what was it? How could those shooters be so relaxed when they were shooting down that one cop, right? That one film that you might have seen.
Video. Yeah,
aren't they a little bit too relaxed? Has somebody told them, look, you have 5 minutes, so strut around a little bit?
It's obvious case of MK Ultra, Webster.
Well, you wonder, because if you were really that experienced, you'd say the main thing here is to get out of town.
Out of Dodge, yeah.
There's also the fact that there was a second gun battle, at least that we know of, or we're told, driving this black car that they went away with. They got to a different part of town, and then they were confronted by another cop and shot him down, but apparently the windshield of the black car is shot full of holes, and then they got into another car and departed in the direction of Paris Saint-Denis. That would mean sort of northwest, as I recall. But at the same time, we're told that in the city of Reims, Rheims, Reims, the Champagne capital, that there's a big anti-terror operation going on. So we don't know. And you also say correctly, this character Pete Williams on NBC, I guess it was whining that his sources were telling him different things during the day.
Yeah.
That earlier in the day, a high-level U.S. security official said that the U.S. government had been officially informed that one terrorist had been killed and the other two arrested, just what you say. But then we find that, no, two of them, the Kouachi brothers, are at large, and the younger guy has surrendered. So what is that, right? How do those two fit together? The other interesting question, looking back to Mohammed Merah, right, being such a long-term notorious agent of the DGSE and the DCRI, the FBI and CIA, or CIA and FBI equivalents, is these Kouachi brothers. One of them was a central figure of what the French call la filière irakienne, the Iraq network, or even the Iraq industry,
really?
Iraq factory, yeah.
Iraq Inc.
And he had been in jail. He had been somebody who wanted to go to Damascus, Syria, travel overland into Iraq, and fight the U.S. in 2003, 2004, 2005, somewhere back there. I'm not sure of the year. But he was then arrested, put in jail. So this is now reminding me of the patsy who began shooting in Australia. When was it? A couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
The guy who was out on parole in the murder case of his wife.
Yeah.
Right? Notorious jailbird. Police knew exactly who he was, and we had the Australian Prime Minister saying, "We'll have to find out why he was out on parole with this criminal record a mile long, and many sex offenses too." So the guy was he was a dangerous repeat offender. But one of the two principal shooters, I guess we have to conclude, was somebody who had a significant criminal record, and well, we have to wonder, is he a double agent too, in the way that Merah was back in 2012? So yes, it's going to help. It might help Sarkozy, might help Le Pen. The other thing that strikes me about it is it poisons and chills the political atmosphere in Europe as we go towards these Greek elections, which are, from the point of view of the banking community, the big deal of the next 2 or 3 months is the Greek election. Will there be an anti-austerity government? Will there be an anti-banker government? Remember, one government might get its hands on all kinds of incriminating material, communications, emails, all sorts of things, and represent a real threat to the system. And then as we look further, we see Belarus, right under Lukashenko, courageously imposing a 30% tax on capital export and de facto exchange and capital controls. And even if we look further afield, Russia itself has imposed a kind of informal system of capital controls and exchange controls on large banks and large corporations, preventing them from sending their wealth out of the ruble and into the West. They're simply being prevented from doing that sort of under the table by the presence of officials, right, functionaries from the finance ministry and the central bank. So the whole finance domination of Europe is very much in question. So I think this is the time when they might say, well, something like this that will chill everything, it might be a good thing. In other words, what they'd like is a situation where if you say, I don't like the European Central Bank, they can answer, you're a terrorist. In other words, think back to what it was like here after 9/11, right? In other words, any kind of dissidence could easily be said, well, you're a malcontent, you may be a terrorist, you better shut up, you better watch
absolutely. Yeah.
The other one is this. This may sound far-fetched, but you have to think about these people. They will try to blame this on Assad. They will. Because of their theory. You'll remember, Assad is a magnet for terrorists. Assad is a magnet for extremists. No, this is what they argue. Yeah. This is Samantha Power. This is John Kerry. This is the whole crew. They say the reason that there is a violent armed rebellion in Syria is because Assad is a bad guy. And if you get rid of Assad, then you get wonderful reforms, and the insurrection dries up. In effect, what you really will get is something looking much more like Libya. but there was this meeting of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons yesterday. Mm-hmm. And this was quite an interesting thing. I did a commentary for the Press TV. If you look at Tarpley.net, you'll see that the committee of this Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the only conclusion they have is that some kind of chlorine gas was used in 2 or 3 villages.
Right.
Then you read the headline in The Guardian of London, in Yahoo of the United States, and Al Jazeera. It says that this agency blames the Syrian government, and that is explicitly denied in the AP Wire Service story, which is the substance, right, with this headline sitting on top. So it's a lie so blatant. It's a lie in the headline, which is going to be refuted if you just have the brains and the patience to read the article.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, a lot don't.
And let's talk about who did this.
We got about a minute and a half.
ISIS czar Allen, General John Allen, U.S. Marine Corps. You remember him, disgraced, crony of Petraeus, both of them disgraced. Petraeus disgraced with Broadwell, Paula Broadwell, and General Allen disgraced with his email traffic with Jill Kelly, who is actually this Lebanese woman, a very dubious and suspicious
Floridian
character.
If I remember.
I'm sorry?
I think she lives in Florida, if I remember.
Yeah, Tampa. It's all around U.S. Central Command, right? So she was the doyenne, the dean of the social system there around the Tampa Air Force Base, right? So she was the Mata Hari of the...
well, how about a madame?
Something like that. Anyway, he's back. He's now the ISIS czar, right? And this guy is scheming from morning till night, and his program is very simple. He says, stop bombing ISIS, don't give ISIS a bad time, bomb Assad. And that actually is the choice. Because ISIS now, even according to the Washington Post, is really hurting, and they're getting driven out of Kobane, and they were supposed to be invincible.
Yeah, they only have 20% of the city left.
The word is that about 100 Europeans have tried to come back from ISIS, and that just about all of them have been caught and executed by ISIS.
You don't
don't go. Anybody thinking about going, don't go, because you're going to get disillusioned, and then when you try to defect, they're going to kill you. So,
you're dead.
And that may also be part of what's behind this event, because of the Kawashis. It's not really known whether either or both have been in Syria lately. That can be another interesting angle.
Well, you have in 1 hour pulled a lot of threads out of some very interesting corners and tied them, or at least laid them side by side for us to try and watch and follow. In the days to come, there will be much spin on this, I'm afraid. It's interesting.
My last word is, please, people, don't confuse intelligence operations with free speech.
Indeed. All right, Webster. Thank you. We're going to have a lot of fun this year. It's crazy out there. All right. Good night.